Now that we're talking about paying old Baylor athletes a portion of their due, it got me to thinking, who deserves it the most? This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Gametime. I am your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Rogue Media Sports Network. It's the studio kind of that I'm in right now. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for making it your first listen today and every day, no matter where you're listening. We appreciate that. Loaded show today in kind of a fun way. You know, obviously it's the end of May. Not a ton going on news-wise. We, of course, are going to talk about the softball super regional later on in the show, give that a little bit of a preview, give them their shout-outs there. But also, we're in the world now where we're paying back these student athletes who didn't get the NIL opportunities. So I thought, which Baylor athletes actually got the best of those opportunities? All that and more on this show. But let's start with that last point. We're paying people back. We're giving them whatever you call it, the back pay on the athletes who missed out on the NIL opportunities that we've really only seen for 3 years now, I want to say. And there's still like stipulations and ways to get around NIL, that there are guys out there and girls, I mean, just players in general, who are probably still not getting their due. So what I wanted to think up was what Baylor athletes would have just killed it in the NIL game had they had the opportunity. Now, there are a couple of different caveats that I need to put in here before, or stipulations before I get into the list. Now, this is looking at NIL the way we know it today. Okay. So this is not a top 5 best athletes at Baylor. In some ways, it's not even the top 5 most marketable, but the more marketable ones do get, an advantage over the non-marketable ones. So that's part of it. And we're also taking like the era in which they played. So spoiler alert, we're not going to have Mike Singletary on here, even though he is a Pro Football Hall of Famer, right? I mean, as big as college football has really always been, it wasn't the moneymaker then that it is now. So I actually think there are people from other athletes or other sports, athletes from other sports on here that would have made more than Mike Singletary. So he's not going to be on the list. Ted Lyons, the Baseball Hall of Famer, not going to be on the list. But that's another thing that leads me to my next point. There are certain sports that just make more money, right? So that kind of goes in again where we've had some great baseball players. We really have through the course of Baylor's history. We've had some great women's basketball players, but those sports necessarily don't make the money that football and men's basketball do. Now, there is a bit of a wrinkle to that. So that's kind of the outline of the list here. So without any further ado, let's get into it. I know I just said women's basketball is at a disadvantage here, but I didn't say that you wouldn't see them on the list because number 5 is Brittany Griner. Okay, here we go. Women's basketball 10, 12, 15 years ago when Brittany Griner was playing is not the monster that we have seen, that we know it as today, as in the last year, right? It just was not as big as we see it today. And I think a lot of people are forgetting that it really only a couple of years ago, it was still not as big as it is now. Like I think of that Dejanay Carrington call or non-call in that UConn game that should have had Baylor in the Final Four. That was 2021. That would have been the biggest story in America if it happened in 2024. So we've come a long way in a short amount of time. Now, that said, Brittany Griner was much bigger than the sport, much bigger. And we kind of went over a lot of this when she came back to Baylor, just how much of a star she was. Like everyone wanted a piece of her. Everywhere you went, the arenas were sold out. We heard stories from those who traveled with her, like the airports. She was like a celebrity walking through. Everyone wanted pictures with her. Everyone wanted her autograph. Everyone knew her as the girl who could dunk. And that in and of itself, I think if this were 2024 and she was doing this, she'd be either number 2 or number 1 on this list. And it still feels weird to put her at 5, but you just got to remember the context of things. She still would have made a ton of money. Again, I mean, she was bigger than the sport at the time. People who didn't watch a lick of women's basketball knew who Brittany Griner was. In fact, when I'll go home to Massachusetts and they see Baylor stuff, they ask about Brittany Griner. Even before all the things that happened the last 2 years or so, everyone would ask about Brittany Griner. So she was that big and stood to make a ton of money. And, maybe not Caitlin Clark level, but probably pretty close. There are a few stars who were bigger than the sport before Caitlin Clark. And I would offer up, I would even go boldly and say Brittany Griner might have been the biggest star in terms of marketability, in terms of transcending women's basketball that we had seen. Maybe not the best, but the biggest star, I think, before Caitlin Clark. So Brittany Griner checks in at number 5. Number 4, we go to men's basketball, and this one is a little weird, but bear with me here. The guy is Jeremy Sohan. Now, I already know what you're saying. Cam, he played 1 year, and they had NIL back then, but they don't have it for international players. Jeremy Sohan is an international player. And so that's the only one on this list that's like that, but I think if it was 2024, when we know a little bit more about NIL, and if they allowed the foreign players to accept it, then absolutely Jeremy Sohan would be right up there, even not being one of the top players in college basketball. He was still a top 10 pick, and we know the great personality that Sohan has. He was a bit of an agitator on the court, but huge personality off of it, the different hair colors, how funny he can be, is and can be at times. Like, he had a big personality with a distinctive style on the court and off. I think he would have been a big time NIL guy had he had that opportunity and had we been a little bit further in the NIL game. I'm talking, hair products, modeling probably, because he likes all kinds of fashion. We could have saw a lot with Jeremy Sohan that we weren't able to see because we were early on in the game and because he's a foreign player. And also, you got to remember, he comes in when Baylor's the defending national champions. So as much as they're not the brand that Kentucky and Kansas and Duke are, that was like striking while the iron was hot, or close to the most hot. But there is someone else on the list who would have struck when the iron was at its absolute hottest. But that is coming up after a word from our friends over at FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, my favorite place to go and print some money, okay? It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and what FanDuel's doing is they're going to give you a shot to bring home a big win for yourself, even if your team does not. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150. You can bet on spreads, money lines, player props, so much more. You can bet on, what color hair Jeremy Sohan's going to have when they start the season again, probably. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on, LOCKEDON. FanDuel, America and my number one sportsbook. All right, we're into the top 3, the medal stand, if you will, for who would have been the best NIL earners in Baylor history and the way we know it now. So we started men's basketball at number 4 with Sohan. We're going to continue on that path with number 3, and that is the great Jared Butler. Okay, Butler does not have the archetypal personality that Jeremy Sohan had, right? And has. Like, he's not doing all different kinds of hairstyles. He's not very bombastic, and that's probably a good thing. But he doesn't necessarily see the NIL coming from there. Where he is seeing it is being a first-team All-American on the national championship team and the best Baylor team in history. And beyond that, and I think this is important, unlike Sohan and unlike a guy like Davion Mitchell, he came into his last season being the biggest star on the team and being one of the biggest stars in the country. He was an All-American the year before. He was an all Big 12 guy the year before. He was the preseason player of the year in the Big 12. And some had him on the short list for preseason national player of the year. So he had the hype, and we knew how big a player he was going into that final season. And it being the best season in Baylor history, I think that would have been terrific for him. And a guy who felt out the NBA draft waters the year before. I think there's something to that, to, companies saying, oh my gosh, here he comes, the best player in the team's coming back, and they're going to win the national championship. Like there's a lot to that as well. But I mean, really what you break it down to, first team All-American, Final Four, most outstanding player for the team that won the Final Four. Like that month, especially or 2 months between winning the national championship and hearing his name called in the NBA draft, I think that would have been big for Jared Butler in terms of NIL opportunities. Number 2, and finally, we get to football. Football is obviously the biggest player in all of this. Football is always going to be what makes the most money. And so number 2 on the list is the great Corey Coleman, 2015 Biletnikoff winner, and truly one of the best players in Baylor football history. First round pick to the Cleveland Browns in 2016. He was a monster at Baylor, an absolute monster. I mean, we're talking about the best offenses in the country, and he was kind of the prototype, right? The receiver who was big and strong and could outrun anybody on a football field, just a freak of nature in all the best ways. Touchdown machine. I mean, legit. Y'all, 2015, I was there. College game day, November of 2015, with my rally towel. It said Corey Coleman for Heisman. It's usually behind me in my home studio. If you're watching on YouTube, it's always there. There was legit Heisman Trophy hype for a wide receiver for Baylor, which is, it seems a far cry now, but it was very real. It was very cool. I mean, he was just doing things that we hadn't even seen in the Bryles offense, man, like 3-4 touchdowns a game. I think at that game that I'm talking about against OU, I think they were 8 games into the season, and he had 20 something touchdowns. Like he was incredible, and he was the perfect player for the nation's most exciting offense. I think that stuff writes itself. I really do. And he was seen as a first round kind of talent again, like the Butler thing before his last year at Baylor. And I think that's really important. Three of the best seasons in Baylor's history, really. He was a focal point in that. And boy, he had all kinds of hype around him. I could just see, not only every car dealership in town, but Nike of Just Do It and things like that. Like he was the ultimate athlete, and I think that would have played really, really well. So before we get to number 1, I do want to list some honorable mentions, and like total Watch Mojo top 10 style, list some honorable mentions and kind of give some reasoning as to why these guys were not on the list. So first one I'm going to go with is Shea Langoliers. I'm going to include Jason Jennings in here too as the 2 baseball players. Jason Jennings obviously won the Golden Spikes Award. I believe Baylor's only player to ever do that. He was the best 2-way baseball player in the entire country. Shea Langoliers was an unbelievable talent at Baylor, top 10 pick, highest draft pick in Baylor history. And those guys were elite on the baseball diamond. But as I kind of mentioned earlier, as much as I would love to put those guys in there, college baseball just does not have the marketability. It's still a pretty niche sport when it's all said and done. And really in my lifetime, I can't think of many guys in total, like in general, who would have made NIL money off of baseball. The one that comes to mind is Steven Strasburg, but small school guy, San Diego State. And if you weren't tuned into college baseball, you didn't know a lot about him. He was a huge phenom. He was throwing like perfect games, 22 strikeouts, whatever the hell he had in some of those games, playing for Tony Gwynn. Like that would have been a cool kind of experiment NIL wise, but for Baylor, it was not going to happen. So that's why those 2 guys don't make the list. Obviously the potential was definitely there. In terms of other football guys, Jalen Petrie, I really thought about being on this list. And I think if I had to rate it, he's probably number 6. a guy who I think technically had NIL opportunities his last year. I think 21 we had that, but didn't. It was still in its infancy, and Baylor was still trying to figure it out, and he didn't have a huge shot at that. But I just think of like all the storyline behind Petrie of being, the one who stayed and becoming one of the best defensive players in the country. But what works against him is he's not a quarterback. He's not a running back, not a receiver, not a wily kicker or anything. He was defensive back. And so that doesn't normally get a lot of attention when it comes to the NIL space and the marketability space. So Petrie just misses out. And another guy who's probably right on that same plane. In fact, as I'm thinking about it now, I might put this guy at 6 rather than Petrie, is Bryce Petty. How do you have a great receiver in Corey Coleman without a great quarterback? Well, they didn't. They did have a great quarterback. He was unbelievable. Obviously, those last 2 years at Baylor in 13 and 14, probably, could have made a strong case to be in New York City for the Heisman Trophy presentation. His junior year in 2013, good looking, All-American, aw shucks kind of quarterback, leading the best offense in the country. Always poised, calm, collected, and put up 1 billion points a game and threw for a couple of miles and things like that. So, and it is, for those of you who are younger Baylor fans and don't remember those Bryles times, in terms of on the football field, man, everyone wanted a piece of Baylor. Baylor still was not the brand that at the time, I'm thinking of the other teams like Ohio State, Florida State, Alabama, obviously. They weren't that in terms of a branding, but they were the most intriguing team in the whole country. And people did watch them, and they were kind of social media and ESPN pariahs at the time. And so all of that made for, the quarterback having a good opportunity to make some money. But of course, number one, one more honorable mention, Michael Johnson. He started seeing his real success, obviously, probably the best athlete in Baylor's history, after he left Baylor. That's when runners hit their peak. So he was winning gold medals and things after his time at Baylor. That could have been cool, fastest man alive type of marketing, but it was after his time at Baylor. So that's why he doesn't make it. Number one, finally, now. If you didn't know it was RG3, I don't know what to tell you. It is. It's Robert Griffin III, Baylor's only Heisman Trophy winner and the most exciting player in college football, obviously, and really one of the best Heisman Trophy winners of that decade, I would say. Like he especially what he did, how he found Baylor versus how he left it is just unbelievable. And I know there are a lot of you who listened who were at Baylor at the time of RG3 or even before, and you see what Baylor is afterwards. It's a completely different place. The Flutie effect is what it's called. There's really only 2 schools in the country that have experienced something like this. It's Boston College and it's Baylor. Doug Flutie made BC from a little Catholic school that did play some football to a place where people wanted to go. All their admissions numbers went up. Their applications went up. They had to build out the school a bit more. They became more selective. All of those things happened at Baylor. The campus got bigger. We're talking about a new business building and the brick and the new fountain and all those things. The Baylor got more selective. They got more people from out of state. They built a new football stadium off the success of RG3. Him winning the Heisman Trophy is what brought this national attention to Baylor. And I am a victim of that. I really am. I was a freshman in high school when RG won the Heisman. And he put Baylor on the map. He put Baylor on the map. From the thing I said earlier about Brittany Griner, the other name that comes up obviously is Robert Griffin III. When I go home and get my hair cut at the local barbershop, the guy never remembers me because I come like once every other year. And he asks, about Baylor, because I tell him I went to Baylor, and he's like, oh, that's where RG3 went. Yeah, RG3 would have been swimming in the cash, man. We saw it like the next year, what happened with Johnny Manziel without NIL. Like, think of what RG3 could have done. He was the most marketable superstar in all of college sports at the time, in a time with Brittany Griner. So he he was such a massive celebrity to the point where when he is announced as the Heisman Trophy winner, the lady says Robert Griffin III, RG3, because that was the brand. He had the best brand of anyone at the time, was the best player of anyone at the time, and had the biggest impact on college football and on his specific school. So far and away, Robert Griffin III, you made a good amount of money afterwards, but you missed out on a lot of money at Baylor. If that's any consolation, you're number one on the list. So congratulations, RG3. I don't know if you needed any more accolades at Baylor, but it's never quite enough, and you did just get some more. And when RG3 goes to Baylor football games or anyone that he's not commentating, I know that he uses Gametime because it's the number one place to go and find your tickets. It's my favorite place. I haven't used anything else in years because of Gametime, because what I like about it is you go in there, you go into the app, and they've got the all-in pricing right there. That price that you see is the price you're going to pay. And the picture you see, the view from your seat, that's the view that you're actually going to have. So before I'm hitting purchase, I know my price, and I know exactly where I'm sitting, and I know how good a deal it is, all through the Gametime app. They'll have flash deals and zone deals throughout the week. They also have the lowest price guarantee. So if you go and find a ticket in your row, in your section at another website, and it's cheaper, Gametime is going to credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. We do have Baylor sports this weekend, the only sports still going for Baylor, and that is the softball team. They are off to Gainesville, Florida. They're actually already there in hopefully better weather than we're having in Waco this week, to Gainesville, Florida, to play the number 4 Florida Gators in the Super Regional. Bears there for the first time since 2017. That was also their last College World Series appearance as well. That is what's on the line this weekend. Oklahoma City is on the line this weekend. And a lot of people did not think the Bears would be here, but here they are. They go on the road in the regional. They face Louisiana 3 times in 2 days and beat them twice. And they do it in dramatic fashion. It's a blowout win in the first game. Then you go to Sunday and Louisiana's playing for their lives. Bang, they run rule you in game 1 of the day. And Glenn Moore said this after the game to his team. He said, the way that you guys got beat in game 1 against a team that is favored, that is used to advancing, that is on their home field, that has the momentum, they came back with a ton of grit. And if you watch the game, I mean, softball is an intense sport, but you could just feel the intensity coming through the screen in this game. Every hit, every big out, every strikeout, they were just fired up. And it was early blows, right? I mean, each team scored in the first. I think each team scored in the second. A couple of home runs in there for the Bears. And then, of course, my biggest play of the weekend, which we talked about on Monday's show, Taylor Strain throwing out the tying run at the plate, the Robinson native with arguably the biggest play of the season for someone who's had to shift around, seen her role change throughout the last 2 years, shifts to center field with no Mackenzie Wilson there. Bang, seed, biggest play of the year. And the play that, once again, Glenn Moore said, I didn't think we had a chance at. And you watch the replay, not to continue on just this one play, but if you watch the replay of that, he's got a good point. They really shouldn't have had a play. It was a good runner coming in from second. It was a solidly hit ball. And he said it just needed perfect execution. That's exactly what you got. Strain took a perfect angle to it, played it on a hop, and just a perfect throw for the catcher to take on a hop and tag the runner out as she's sliding in. It was absolutely perfect. It was poetry in motion. So that's how the Bears got here. And I talked about how they have been pulling themselves up by their bootstraps all season long when a ton of things have gone against them. And I could say the same thing about the Florida Gators, because you look at them, they're top 5. They're one of the hottest teams in the country, but it was not always that easy. In fact, like a month ago, It was not that easy. There was something that they kept bringing up on their broadcast last week on like the end of April. They got run ruled by Florida State with like a 10-run fifth inning in this game or something. It was ugly. It was bad. And their coach had told them, we're going on the road for the regionals if we keep playing like this. And that's what had happened last year. And they went out early. They were barely holding on to the top 20, and they had to turn things around. And, they absolutely have. They've won 11 straight going into this game. They absolutely dominated the regional last weekend. I think it was 24-2 with 2-run rule victories in the regional in the NCAA tournament. They are absolutely rolling right now. And now not only did they get a regional at home, they get a super regional at home. So it took a real turnaround, and Tim Walton, their coach, being pretty darn honest with them, but they have responded. For the Bears, this is again nothing new. So you go against a team with a bunch of confidence and playing at home, and certainly that still favors Florida. But Baylor's been battling this stuff all year long. The injuries and the on the field setbacks, the dropping in rankings, the record against ranked opponents, all of that, and here they are, just a couple of wins from the Women's College World Series, and a big part of that has been their pitching, which has really stepped up. Riley Crandall specifically in that last series was incredible. Like, she was the microcosm of the team pulling itself up. That loss on Sunday, she goes one inning, I think gave up 3 runs. It was ugly. It was a mess. Then she bounces back in the second game that day. Complete game, gives up her most hits, I think, all year, by the way, with 9. So it's not like she had her best stuff, but worked through it. Only gave up 3 runs, had some huge ground outs with runners in scoring position and runners on base. And of course, gets a little help from the defense from Taylor Strain, but she just kept that mental toughness. And that's what this team has done all season long. So are they favorites against Florida? No, they're not. But count these Bears out at your own risk. I will be tuned in. We'll, of course, have more on it on Monday. Let me know what you think about the Bears' chances this weekend in Gainesville. Drop that down in the comments below. Friday, today at 11 a.m., and then Saturday at 10 a.m., if I'm not mistaken. A couple of early mornings for the ladies. Drop that down in the comments below. What did I get the NIL thing wrong? I probably missed someone. Drop that. Drop what you would think, who you would put and why down in the comments below, or just say, hey, I like to see that too. It helps the algorithm. Be sure to like and subscribe. Ring the notification bell. We're bringing fresh new content to you every single day on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. Have a lovely weekend, will you? Unless anything breaks and I see you before then. Until then, this has been and will be on Memorial Day, Locked On Baylor.